or opinions of Equity Media, its management, staff, or affiliates of WBOK.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Dr. Clark's 101, the Living Classroom. And today we're going to talk Title IX 101 with my friend Katika Harris, who is the Title IX coordinator actually at Dillard University here in the city of New Orleans. And greetings and welcome, my friend. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and we're going to talk about Title IX. And Title IX is, unless you're actually highly involved in government and government policy and public policy, unless you're an educator or someone that's out there in the community that's involved in athletics, education, these sort of areas, you perhaps may not know about it. But I want us to talk about what is Title IX and why it is so inherently important. Yes.
Yeah, so Title IX is one of those many unfunded mandates, right? 1972. It's been around for quite some time, and it's really a law that is specific to education, the industry of education. And Title IX is with respect to gender equity, and it's about making sure that there are equitable opportunities for all genders on campus. It's not just for higher education; it's also for K-12. But that's what most people know about Title IX from. They know about the sports, athletics, but over the years, it's evolved, and it also addresses issues regarding sexual harassment.
Yes, I know it's highly impactful in our community. And one thing I do know that's important about Title IX, I know it began in 1972, which was a real good year. And it began in 1972, and I know that at the time, Senator Birch Bayh, he was moderate to liberal Republican, should we say, wrote the first 35 words or so to Title IX. He was very instrumental in bringing this about. 1972 really was a pivotal year when it comes to public policy and in education and in the country. But most people see Title IX, as you say, as relating to athletics.
Hmm.
And because part and parcel to our understanding of Title IX is that what you do for male athletes and male programs, one must also have
An
and do
equivalent
the
opportunity,
equivalent opportunities for
female.
females.
Hmm.
Explain how that works.
So it's not about having like the same
Okay.
opportunity. For example, if you have a football team, it's not you're not required to have another football team for women. You're just required to have an equitable opportunity for women so that they can participate in that type of an athletic opportunity, sport. It's not just about the opportunities, but it's also about access. So making sure that, if the men have a really nice football stadium to play in and they have amazing locker rooms, you have to have the equivalent for the women as well. So it's about balancing and making sure that there's truly gender equity throughout programs, educational programs, and activities for institutions that receive federal funding.
Oh, that's the key.
That's the key.
If you receive federal funding, then you must indeed have that sort of balance. And in some form or fashion, these institutions do receive federal funding in some form or fashion. So therefore, they must be responsible and responsive to the federal government. Yes.
Yes, there are several requirements that are attached to receiving that federal funding, just as if there's regulations, and if institutions don't comply with those regulations, they could lose federal funding.
Again, amazing. When we talk about federal funding, we're not talking about $100, $1,000. You're talking about tens of thousands of dollars in some cases.
Financial aid.
Yes,
Hmm.
we can go into the millions. And
Absolutely.
so when we look at Title IX and try to understand its importance, um, I would think that at some form or fashion you have to have some degree of compliance.
Yes.
And if you can talk to our listeners and audience and talk about the nature of the compliance and the compliance officer and how compliance and why it is indeed so important.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question because it's not just Title IX, right? What I always like to give an analogy of, when you think about federal laws, there's Title IX, and then there's the Clery Act, which has been recently renamed to the Campus Safety, Jean Cleary Campus Safety Act. Um, and then there's also VAWA, which is the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act. And these federal requirements go hand in hand because Title IX is about preventing discrimination or harassment based on sex. And then the Clery Act, along with making sure that we're reporting crime statistics, which would also include any form of dating violence, domestic violence, stalking, or sexual assaults. That is related to the Clery Act. And then the Clery Act also requires education. It requires prevention education. Primary prevention education is what's required under the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act. So all of these things go hand in hand. And if you're not compliant with one and you happen to get audited, trust and believe they're going to audit to make sure that you're compliant with the others.
And what is involved in an audit?
An audit is when the Department of Education will come in and they generally would send a letter, regarding whatever concern has been brought to their attention. Generally, they would give you an opportunity to correct that. And in some cases, depending upon how egregious the alleged violation might be, they might institute an investigation and they come in and they start to look at your files and they start to look at, how you've managed how you're managing the grievance process. If you have a Title IX coordinator, which you're required to have under the regulations now, if that individual's trained, if the individuals who are involved in the adjudication process have the appropriate training, is that training available on your website? There are so many regulations under Title IX that require institutions to basically demonstrate transparency and how they are managing the grievance process and also how they are addressing community concerns.
Now, sexual harassment, sexual violence, that comes under you. That comes under your purview.
Yes.
And so, why is that so significant, in particular with universities?
Unfortunately, between the ages of 18 and 24 is when you see instances of dating violence, domestic violence, stalking, and sexual assault. There are statistics that talk about, 1 in 3 individual women will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. 1 in 4 men will experience domestic violence. And then when we talk about sexual violence, it used to be that we were concerned about stranger danger, but now 90% of individuals who experience any form of sexual assault, they know the person who is accused of causing that harm. And so it's important that we educate new students, returning students, employees, faculty, any members of our community so that they understand what needs to be reported. And that's one of the things I think that is most challenging is creating a culture of reporting on campuses, and even within communities, because Title IX is not just specific to higher education. It also applies at the K-12 level, and they're required to also have Title IX coordinators.
Now, what differences do you have between the K through 12 and universities?
Some of the differences I think would include the types of violations that they see. I don't think that at K-12 institutions they may not see
Okay.
as much dating violence or
Okay.
domestic violence.
Mhm. But they would have what sort of?
Harassment.
Okay.
They could see gender-based harassment,
All right.
harassment based on sex. They could also see instances of their sexual abuse, sexual violence happens in high school. It happens. It doesn't really matter how old you are. So it's really important to educate students so that they understand. A lot of times, what I've found is students don't even realize that what they've experienced is actually sexual violence.
They think it's the norm.
They're
Or
sometimes they're
yeah.
just confused. They're like, this doesn't feel right, but I'm not sure quite what to name it. They can't name it.
Okay. Now, I know there's something that's new on the, now on the horizon, but a new introduction into this, and that is the nature of transgender protections. And you talk to our listeners and tell us about how that works in terms of the transgender preferences under the Title IX.
Yeah, so with the new regulations, I shouldn't say new, but the 2020 regulations that are now in effect, there are no more protections under the 2020 regulations as it relates to gender identity, gender expression. However, most institutions have other policies that will address that form of discrimination when it happens. And so just because it's not handled under the Title IX process doesn't necessarily mean that it would just be ignored. It shouldn't be ignored. It should be addressed under a different institutional policy. But the 2024 regulations were more inclusive and they did include gender identity, gender expression. However, when we reverted back to the 2020 regulations, that protection is no longer there under Title IX.
Well, I would imagine that the compliance process is pretty it's pretty extensive. So with the compliance, and then when you by the time you get to the point where you have to do enforcement, then that's also extensive.
It
What,
is.
what is if you can give me a typical timeline, if there is a typical timeline from recognizing an issue to
The resolution?
satisfying the resolution? Yes.
Yeah. What I will say is that a couple things. It is that the law itself has not changed since 1972. However, the political interpretation of the law continues to change. And with that, we have received various expectations in terms of regulatory guidance. And right now, um, I would say the average timeline, I mean, a lot of policies used to say within 90 days, 90 business days, we would reach a resolution. However, it's not really realistic because of the nature of the investigation that has to happen, the depth and the depth of what's required for the investigation process is extensive. So it has to be a complete investigation. And once that report is done, then there's a 10-day review period for parties to review it. So it's 10 business days for them to review it. Then after they've reviewed it, they have an opportunity to provide comments, to the investigator if anything was incorrect or if anything is they missed something, and then they have the investigator takes that report and then they finalize it, and then it's released again for another 10 days prior to a hearing. So, and there's also the evidence review process that happens. So it's an extensive process, and no more. You cannot really get through the process within 90 business days. It usually takes probably 180 business days minimum to get through
Okay.
a
Now,
process.
again, I've got to be more pragmatic. What about the staffing? I would think that because from what I see, this is pretty labor intensive,
It is very labor
and
intensive.
so it requires, I would think, at an institution, and I know if it's K through 12, I don't know if all the high schools, if you must have a compliance person at every high school. I know we mentioned earlier that you must have one at every institution, at every university. But would it be the same in the K through 12 environments?
Usually with the K through 12 environment, what I've
Yes.
seen is that they have a Title IX coordinator at the district level.
Okay. Okay.
Not necessarily at each school. And in my experience, the principals at the schools are basically managing a lot of the behavioral issues that come up and consulting with the Title IX coordinator regarding, next steps in terms of resolution. The other thing I want to mention about Title IX is that one thing that is required, regardless of the incident report, whether it happened on campus or off campus, um, whether it's sexual misconduct, meaning it doesn't fall under Title IX, it falls under a different institutional policy, or it falls under Title IX, is that resources are always provided to individuals who are impacted. So that is something that is standard. Like there are students should have opportunity for supportive measures. They should have an opportunity to receive any resources, community resources, whether they're external or internal. And also sometimes there's a need to, if someone's going to be miss a class or they're going to be late for a class, that they're not penalized. And so they work with the Title IX coordinator to make sure that um, those resources are provided and that those supportive measures are provided. Title IX also provides protections for pregnant students. And I think that's the piece that a lot of folks don't realize. And so a pregnant student has the right to attend, school and not be treated differently. They don't have to, provide medical documentation. If they need a larger desk or they need, time for lactation, the school should also have a lactation space available to them. So there are protections because again, pregnancy is a gender specific condition, and so that's why it falls under sex discrimination under Title IX.
One thing we did not address, and that I would be remiss if we didn't attack this before we move forward to the next level, to the next phase uh, today, hazing.
Yes,
Oh, that's real big in this environment. I know we have so many universities around in our vicinity
yes,
here in South Louisiana, but if you can address hazing, because hazing is an issue on every university campus in some form or fashion.
absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's not just it's nationwide, which is why we saw that former President Biden signed the Stop Campus Hazing Act in December of 2024, prior to leaving office, and that requires institutions of higher education to educate students around hazing. They also provided a national definition of hazing, and it's a very broad definition. So it's not just related to athletic programs or sororities or fraternities. It could be a band situation. Anytime there are more than two people involved, and there's any form of an initiation that's required for someone to be a part of a group. So that definition is broader. It also requires transparency reporting that is posted on websites annually, as well as making sure that individuals are trained, not just the students, but the community as a whole is trained to understand what hazing
Yeah, what
is.
is hazing? At what point? At what point is one hazed? Would you say yes?
So basically, if you think about it in the context of an athletic, we'll just say an athletic sport, because that's easy. And let's say whatever requirements are mandated for all people to participate in, that's not hazing, right? Because everyone's included in that, and those things are mandated. It's the extra things that people are required to do, that could potentially cause physical, psychological, emotional harm, right? And these are things that you can't consent to being hazed. So even if you say you're in agreement because you want to be a part of this organization or this, you want to participate in this opportunity, but it is something that generally is not required. It's not part of the normal process to join that organization. And it is something where you're asking someone to do something that could cause them harm, whether it's physical, emotional, psychological. Sometimes it's even financial, So
I mean, hazing can be financial.
it certainly can. Yes.
These are things we're now learning. These are things we're learning that all organizations need to know and understand. In this particular environment that we live in, under this particular cultural environment with the new administration at the top, um, Title IX. How do you see the viability of Title IX under the Trump administration and conservatives running the House, the Senate, and also the U.S. Supreme Court?
I will tell you that a lot of the programs around primary prevention education are experiencing loss and cuts from the federal level. A lot of grant funded programs, specifically as it relates to anti violence programs and funding. They're, with all of the federal shutdown, that impacts the ability for grant funds and programs to move forward. Some of the cuts in Washington, specifically in the Department of Education, it leaves us wondering what enforcement will look like. And also, there's not really any guidance. Like you can't really reach out to someone at the Department of Ed like you could before because it's so narrowly staffed. Um, and then not knowing, like some of the offices have closed. I've worked with schools that have resolution agreements, but they can't get any guidance because no one's in the office to answer to tell them if the steps that they're taking are um, equivalent to what the expectations are in that resolution agreement. So it really is impacting the ability for Title IX coordinators to do their work and for institutions to, remain compliant with the regulatory guidance.
So rather than engage in a policy, a state of policy that that Title IX would no longer exist, you just engage what we would call bureaucratic sabotage. You just don't fund it.
Well, Title IX was not funded,
Okay.
but
I mean the compliance people.
yes, the
Yeah.
compliance
Yes.
people, right? Like if someone files a complaint with the Department of Education regarding, how they feel they were treated in a Title IX process, I'm not sure what that timeline is going to look like. I don't know what the response is going to look like because there's not a lot of clarity on who's still working at the Department of Education.
Well, in the remaining minutes that we do have, I'd like for our audience to know something about you. Just tell us how you became involved in Title IX and the process that brought you into this fold.
Okay, sure. So for
Tika
me,
Harris, yes.
it's been I kind of fell into the profession of student affairs. My undergraduate degree is in criminal justice, and I worked in the juvenile courts for about 7 years before I transitioned into higher education. And then I started working in enrollment management. And at the time, I had young children, and it was a lot of travel.
Where were you?
I was in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So I had young children. It was a lot of travel. And so I had decided I was going to do 2 years with that. And then when it was time to transition, the leadership there said, well, we would hate to lose you. What else might you be interested in? And they talked to me about student conduct. I didn't know anything about student conduct because when I went to school, I fortunately didn't get in trouble and had to see a conduct officer. And then when I was a commuter student, I wasn't on campus long enough to get in trouble. So I learned about student conduct and I transitioned into a role in student conduct. And at that time, it was prior to the 2011 Dear Colleague letters under the Obama administration that basically said you have to do X, Y, and Z as it relates to a grievance policy for sex discrimination. And so at that time, officers were handling all of that work. And so handling any sexual assault, stalking cases, all of those things. And so eventually, as the field kind of immersed into more requirements and regulatory guidance around Title IX, I kind of transitioned into doing more of that work and eventually did it at a district level at a community college in Texas for about 10 years.
Oh, that is enough time to really become involved and immersed. And then you moved into what you do here at our university at the Title IX coordinator at Dillard.
Yes.
And your presentation was outstanding, one of the better presentations I've seen.
Thank
Period.
you.
Oh, yeah, it was very thorough, very complete.
I try to make it plain.
And highly knowledgeable. I took notes.
Oh,
I've seen Title IX presentations for the past 15 years. Yes.
right. I try to make a very difficult concept very simple to understand, right? And really, truly, it is about creating a culture of reporting. And the more people know and understand, the more they'll report. I am a firm believer that you can never over-report because you never know how your one report might change and impact somebody's life.
You cannot over-report, and that's beautiful to understand. And how can someone reach you if they had to contact you?
Yeah, so they could always reach out to me via my campus email address, or also it's at Dillard University. It's Title IX at dillard.edu. Also, they could reach out via phone as well. So yeah, they could reach out any kind of way.
Okay, and before we exit, I'd like to know, just period, what is perhaps the most central concern that you see as a professional when it comes to Title IX through your existing experience?
Yeah, the most central concern that I see, I think it relates to minors on campus, to be honest.
Manners.
Minors on
Okay.
campus. And what I mean by that is like camps and conferences, because a lot of institutions will lease space for minors to
Yes.
participate in camps and
Summer,
conferences. Hmm.
weekend.
Yes. And as a Title IX coordinator, that's one of the things that I often worried about. Like it was one of those things that kept me up at night, making sure that all the folks who are engaging with minors are trained properly, that they understand how to report, and making sure that, minors are getting the services and resources that they would need. That's one of the things that throughout my career has always been a challenge
I
because
can imagine that indeed would be pretty extensive. You have the manners on campus, and almost every campus, especially that's the key
revenue.
to is revenue
Hmm.
enhancing, and it's also a form of recruitment.
Absolutely. But that's why when I do presentations, I always remind folks about, what happened at Penn State with those minors
Yes,
on campus and
yes,
what happened with, Michigan State University and, the Olympic athletes. And, those things impacted those institutions significantly. And had they not been large institutions, I don't know that they would have survived. Penn State received a fine of over $2 million, and in Michigan, that fine was 4.5 million, which is the highest in the Department of Education's history.
and with Penn State, if I can recall, a custodian was one who recognized and served.
Hmm.
And to be honest, most custodians in all institutions, K through 12, whatever it may be, they're the front line.
They
They see
are.
it. They see a lot,
They
and
are.
they see everything. Yes.
And as a Title IX coordinator, I make sure that everyone gets trained. Third party contractors get trained, custodians, like you mentioned, facility staff, police departments. I go to every single shift. I don't care if it's 11 o'clock at night, because it's important for them to have that information. Because to your point, they do see it all.
What's your reception when you walk into a campus?
I think at first people are often kind of on guard, and I always say people don't want to hear from me. They don't want to get any emails from me because they're concerned about what I'm
Yes.
reaching out about. But I think over time, as you build relationships and you create capacity on the campus, folks are glad to see me and they welcome collaboration.
Oh, I like that. Well, collaboration, that's the key.
Yes,
We need some collaboration
absolutely, absolutely.
True compliance. Again, this is Dr. Clark's 101, the Living Classrooms. We were talking Title IX 101 with my friend Katika Harris. And I want to thank you for joining me. I hope you'll come back again and we can talk about this
Absolutely.
issue and more issues which are important to you as well. Can it work?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. And again, this is Dr. Clark, and you can follow me on all platforms of social media. And as always, it's been a pleasure.